He was just supposed to be another working-class dreamer with impossible aspirations. They never expected the quiet custodian who mopped their floors to challenge everything they thought they knew about intelligence, worthiness, and what it truly means to fight for your family's future. But when the truth about his 8-year-old daughter emerged, even the most skeptical professors fell silent. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above Marcus Chen as he pushed his cart down the pristine hallways of Whitmore Academy, one of Boston's most elite preparatory schools. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His worn sneakers squeaked softly against the polished marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people made in a month. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, their oil-painted faces seeming to look down with the kind of inherited confidence that Marcus had never known but desperately wanted his daughter to possess. It was 3 a.m, the time when buildings reveal their true character. Without the bustle of privileged students and their equally privileged parents, Whitmore Academy felt less like an institution of learning and more like a monument to everything Marcus Chen would never be. He had been cleaning these halls for 2 years now, ever since Sarah was 6, and he realized that his day job at the auto repair shop wasn't going to be enough. Not if he wanted to give her the kind of future that seemed to live behind these mahogany doors. Marcus paused outside classroom 3A, where advanced placement literature was taught to 17-year-olds who spoke about Dostoevsky with the same casual authority their parents discussed stock portfolios. Through the glass door, he could see the whiteboard still covered with complex literary analysis from the previous day's discussion. He understood more of it than he let on, but understanding and belonging were two very different things in a place like this. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez, his elderly neighbor who watched Sarah during his night shifts. "She's still up reading. Told her 3 times to go to bed. That girl of yours is something else, Marcus. Don't know where she gets it from, but she's got a mind like I've never seen." Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. Sarah had always been different. While other kids her age were content with picture books and cartoons, she devoured novels meant for high schoolers. She taught herself basic calculus by watching online videos, built complex structures with whatever scraps she could find around their small apartment, and asked questions that made Marcus realize how much of the world he didn't understand. But intelligence without opportunity was like having a sports car without gas. It could look impressive sitting in the driveway, but it wasn't going to take you anywhere. That's why he was here, mopping floors at 3 a.m, saving every penny he could scrape together. Harvard wasn't just a dream for Marcus Chen. It wasn't about personal glory or proving something to the world. It was about opening doors for Sarah that he could never open for himself. With a Harvard degree, he could provide her with the kind of life where her brilliant mind wouldn't be constrained by the limitations of their current circumstances. The application had been sitting on his kitchen table for 3 months before he finally filled it out. Every night after his shifts, he would sit at their tiny dining table, staring at the forms that seemed designed for people who lived in a different universe. Questions about extracurricular activities, leadership roles, and volunteer experiences. Marcus had worked 2 jobs since Sarah was born. His extracurricular activity was making sure the rent was paid on time. His leadership experience was being a single father who had never let his daughter see him cry, even when the medical bills from her mother's final months threatened to drown them both. But Marcus was not a man who accepted limitations easily. He had taught himself to read at 7 when his own father was too drunk to help with homework. He had earned his GED while working full-time to support his pregnant girlfriend when they were both 19. And when cancer took Elena away when Sarah was just 2 years old, leaving him with a toddler and more debt than hope, he had somehow found a way to keep moving forward. The Harvard application was just another mountain to climb, even if everyone around him insisted it was impossible to scale. The admissions essay had been the hardest part. How do you explain a life lived in the margins to people who had never seen the margins? How do you translate the quiet desperation of working 2 jobs while raising a daughter into the kind of inspirational narrative that admissions committees wanted to read? Marcus had written 17 drafts before settling on the truth, raw and unpolished as it was. He wrote about Elena, about the promise he made to her hospital bed to give their daughter everything she deserved. He wrote about the way Sarah's eyes lit up when she solved problems that challenged kids twice her age. And he wrote about his own hunger to learn, to grow, to become the kind of father who could answer her questions, instead of promising to look them up later. The guidance counselor at Whitmore Academy, Mrs. Thompson, had been kind but firm when Marcus approached her about recommendation letters. She was a woman in her 50s who had spent her career navigating the delicate politics of elite education, helping wealthy families secure spots at prestigious universities. Her office was decorated with thank-you notes from grateful parents and acceptance letters to Ivy League schools, a shrine to the kind of success that Marcus desperately wanted to believe was possible for someone like him. "Mr. Chen," she had said, adjusting her reading glasses with the careful precision of someone who had delivered disappointing news many times before, "I admire your ambition, I truly do. But Harvard receives over 40,000 applications every year. They accept less than 5%. And those acceptances typically go to students who have been preparing their entire lives for this moment. Valedictorians from elite high schools, students with perfect test scores and impressive internships, young people whose families have connections that open doors." Marcus had nodded politely, his hands folded in his lap like a child being scolded for dreaming too big. But Mrs. Thompson hadn't finished. "I'm not saying this to discourage you," she continued, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm saying this because I want you to have realistic expectations. Perhaps you might consider starting at a community college, working your way up through the state university system. It's a more practical path for someone in your situation." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Someone in your situation. The phrase had echoed in Marcus's head for weeks afterward. What exactly was his situation? Was it being a single father? Being a janitor? Being the son of an alcoholic who had never made it past 8th grade? Or was it simply being the kind of person who didn't belong in the same conversation as Harvard University? But Marcus Chen had never been deterred by other people's definitions of what was practical. If practical had guided his decisions, he would have given up when Elena got sick. He would have placed Sarah in foster care when the medical bills started piling up. He would have accepted that some dreams were meant for other people's children. Instead, he had filled out the application, written the essay, and submitted it with the kind of quiet determination that had carried him through every impossible situation he had ever faced. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, thin and impersonal as a parking ticket. "We regret to inform you that we are unable to offer you admission to Harvard University. This year's applicant pool was exceptionally competitive and, while your application demonstrated many admirable qualities, we were not able to extend an offer of admission at this time." Marcus had read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it in the drawer with all of Sarah's report cards and school pictures. He didn't throw it away, but he didn't put it on the refrigerator either. It was simply another document in the ongoing story of his life, neither a complete failure nor a reason to stop trying. But the news had spread through Whitmore Academy like wildfire, passed along through the informal network of gossip that kept places like this functioning. The janitor who thought he could go to Harvard, the custodian with delusions of grandeur, the working-class father who didn't understand his place in the world. Marcus heard the whispers in the faculty lounge, caught the meaningful glances between teachers who thought he couldn't see them. He became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when people reach too far beyond their station. Dr. Patricia Williams, the headmaster of Whitmore Academy, was a woman who had built her career on maintaining the delicate balance between tradition and progress that elite institutions required. She had been educated at the finest schools, surrounded her entire life by the kind of intellectual and social capital that opened doors before you even knocked. Her office was a carefully curated display of academic achievement, leather-bound. Books and awards that spoke to a lifetime spent in the rarefied air of educational excellence. She had heard about Marcus's Harvard application through the same informal channels that carried most significant news at Whitmore Academy. Initially, she had felt a mixture of sympathy and mild embarrassment. It was touching in a way that someone like Marcus would have such ambitious dreams for himself. But it was also naive in a way that made her uncomfortable, as if his application somehow reflected poorly on the institution's ability to maintain appropriate boundaries between staff and the academic community. When the rejection letter arrived, Dr. Williams had felt a sense of relief disguised as sympathy. It was better this way, really. Marcus could return to his work without the distraction of impossible dreams. The natural order had been preserved. Everyone could move forward with a clearer understanding of their roles and limitations. But Marcus Chen had not received the memo about natural order. 3 days after the rejection letter arrived, he was back in Dr. Williams's office, not as a supplicant seeking favor, but as a man with a proposal. "I want to audit classes," Marcus said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her desk with the kind of calm confidence that seemed incongruous with his custodial uniform. "Not for credit, not officially. I just want to sit in the back and listen. Learn what I can." Dr. Williams blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the directness of his request. "Mr. Chen, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Our classes are designed for enrolled students, and there are insurance considerations, not to mention the potential disruption to the learning environment." "I clean these classrooms every night," Marcus replied evenly. "I've heard enough conversations to know what's being discussed. I've read the books that get left behind. I'm not asking for special treatment, just the opportunity to grow, to become better than I am right now." There was something in his tone that made Dr. Williams pause. She had spent her career around ambitious people, but Marcus's ambition was different. It wasn't hungry or desperate or self-serving. It was quiet and steady, and somehow more intimidating than the usual demands she fielded from wealthy parents seeking advantages for their children. "And what exactly do you hope to accomplish through auditing classes?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I want to understand," Marcus said simply. "I want to be able to help my daughter with her homework when she gets older. I want to read the book she's reading and have conversations about ideas that matter. I want to be worthy of her intelligence." It was the last sentence that stayed with Dr. Williams long after Marcus had left her office. The idea that someone would seek education not for personal advancement or professional gain, but to be worthy of their child's intelligence was both foreign and strangely moving to someone who had spent her career in environments where education was often treated as a commodity to be acquired and displayed. Against her better judgment, and certainly against the informal policies that governed interactions between staff and academic programs, Dr. Williams found herself agreeing to Marcus's request, with conditions, of course. He could audit no more than 1 class per semester. He would sit in the back and refrain from participating in discussions. And if any student or parent complained, the arrangement would end immediately. Marcus had agreed to every condition without negotiation, grateful for an opportunity he had never expected to receive. His first class was Introduction to Philosophy, taught by Professor David Mitchell, a man in his early 40s who had built his reputation on making complex ideas accessible to students, who were often more interested in college admissions than intellectual growth. The first night Marcus attended class, Sitting quietly in the back row with a notebook he had purchased specifically for the occasion, Professor Mitchell barely noticed him. It was only when the semester was nearly over and Marcus had perfect attendance despite working until 3 in the morning that the professor began to pay attention to the man, who never spoke but seemed to absorb every word. During a discussion of Socratic philosophy, when students were struggling to grasp the concept of knowing nothing, Marcus had raised his hand for the first time all semester. The classroom fell silent, not because his question was particularly profound, but because it was unexpected. Students turned in their seats, curious about the janitor who had been sitting quietly among them for months. "Professor Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the attention focused on him. "Socrates said that the only thing he knew was that he knew nothing. But isn't that itself a form of knowledge? And if wisdom comes from recognizing ignorance, then wouldn't someone who truly knew nothing be unable to recognize their ignorance, and therefore be unable to gain wisdom?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Professor Mitchell paused, his pen frozen above the notebook where he'd been jotting down discussion points. It was the kind of question that revealed not just understanding of the material, but a deeper engagement with the philosophical implications that most of his students never reached. "That's an excellent question, Mr. Chen," Professor Mitchell said finally. "Would you like to explore that paradox further?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus engaged in a philosophical discussion that revealed the depth of thinking he had been developing during his months of silent observation. His questions were thoughtful, his reasoning sound, and his ability to connect abstract concepts to concrete examples was more sophisticated than most of the enrolled students demonstrated. After class, Professor Mitchell approached Marcus as he was gathering his notebook and preparing to return to his custodial duties. "Mr. Chen," he said, extending his hand with genuine respect, "that was one of the most insightful discussions we've had all semester. Have you considered formally enrolling in university courses?" Marcus smiled, but it was tinged with the kind of sadness that comes from dreams deferred. "I applied to Harvard," he said simply. "They weren't interested," Professor Mitchell frowned. Harvard's loss was his immediate thought, though he was too polite to say it aloud. Instead, he handed Marcus his business card. "If you're ever interested in taking this further, I'd be happy to write you a recommendation. You have a rare gift for this kind of thinking." That conversation stayed with Marcus through the long hours of his night shift, through the quiet morning routines with Sarah, through the daily grind of work that paid the bills but left his mind hungry for more. He began to understand that Harvard's rejection wasn't a verdict on his intelligence or his worthiness. It was simply one institution's inability to recognize potential that didn't fit their traditional molds. But recognition, Marcus was learning, could come from unexpected sources. Mrs. Rodriguez, his neighbor who watched Sarah, had mentioned Marcus's Harvard application to her sister, who worked as a secretary in the Boston public school system. Word spread through informal networks, the way significant news always does in tight-knit communities. Soon, Marcus found himself fielding questions from neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances who had never thought much about him beyond his role as the quiet single father who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Some of the reactions were supportive. Mrs. Rodriguez constantly reminded him that education was the one thing no one could take away from you, and that his efforts were setting an important example for Sarah. Others were less encouraging. Tony Morales, who worked the day shift at the auto shop, made frequent jokes about Marcus's fancy dreams and suggested that he was getting too big for his britches. "What's wrong with honest work?" Tony would ask during lunch breaks, his tone just aggressive enough to make the question feel like an accusation. "My father was a mechanic, his father was a mechanic. There's honor in working with your hands, providing for your family without putting on airs." Marcus never took the bait, never engaged in arguments about the value of different types of work or the legitimacy of educational aspirations. He understood that Tony's comments came from his own insecurities, his own fears about being left behind by someone who had once shared his circumstances. But the comments stung anyway, adding another layer of isolation to an already lonely journey. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to amaze everyone around her with intellectual capabilities that seemed to grow more remarkable with each passing month. Her second-grade teacher, Ms. Jennifer Parker, had requested a conference with Marcus in November, not because Sarah was struggling, but because her abilities were so far beyond grade level that Ms. Parker wasn't sure how to challenge her appropriately. "Mr. Chen," Ms. Parker had said, spreading Sarah's work across the conference table like evidence in a case she was trying to solve. "Sarah is reading at a high school level. Her mathematical reasoning is comparable to students in middle school. And her creative writing." She paused, holding up a short story Sarah had written about a girl who could speak to plants. "This shows a sophistication of thought and expression that I've rarely seen in children her age." Marcus had nodded, pride swelling in his chest despite his attempts to remain modest. He knew Sarah was special, had always known it, but hearing it confirmed by an educational professional made it feel more real somehow. "What would you recommend?" he asked, genuinely curious about how to nurture abilities he didn't fully understand. Ms. Parker leaned forward, her expression serious. "Sarah needs more challenging material, opportunities to engage with concepts that match her intellectual capacity. Have you considered testing for the gifted program? Or perhaps looking into specialized schools that could better serve her needs?" The conversation that followed revealed the same obstacles Marcus faced in his own educational pursuits. The best programs were expensive, competitive, and designed for families with resources and connections that Marcus didn't possess. Sarah's intelligence was evident, but intelligence without opportunity was like potential energy that never got converted to kinetic motion. That night, Marcus sat at their kitchen table grading some of Sarah's practice worksheets, marveling at the casual way she solved problems that would have challenged him at twice her age. Sarah was curled up on the couch nearby, reading a novel about quantum physics written for teenagers, occasionally looking up to ask questions that revealed she was actually understanding the material. "Dad," she said during a commercial break. From the educational program she was half watching, "Why didn't Harvard want you?" The question was asked with the kind of innocent directness that children possess, without malice or judgment, just curiosity about something that didn't make sense in her 8-year-old understanding of the world. Marcus set down his pen and looked at his daughter, trying to find words that would be honest without being discouraging. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "institutions have ideas about who belongs there. And sometimes those ideas aren't very flexible." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the same serious consideration she gave to mathematical equations. "But you're smart," she said finally. "You help me with my homework. You know about history and science and books. You know more than most people." "Intelligence comes in many forms," Marcus replied, a phrase he had learned from Professor Mitchell. "Harvard is looking for a specific type of intelligence, demonstrated in specific ways. That doesn't mean other types are less valuable." "But it's not fair," Sarah said, her voice carrying the indignation that comes from a child's pure sense of justice. Marcus smiled despite the weight of the conversation. "No, sweetheart, it's not fair, but life rarely is. The question is what we do when things aren't fair. Do we give up, or do we find other ways to grow and learn and become who we want to be?" Sarah considered this for a moment, then returned to her book about quantum physics. But Marcus could see the wheels turning in her young mind, processing not just the academic material she consumed so voraciously, but the larger lessons about perseverance and justice and the complex ways that society determined worth. Winter settled over Boston like a heavy blanket, bringing shorter days and longer shifts for Marcus. The custodial work at Whitmore Academy expanded during the colder months as students tracked in snow and mud, and the heating systems required constant maintenance. Marcus didn't mind the extra work. It meant more money, and every additional dollar brought him closer to his goals, even if those goals had become less clearly defined since the Harvard rejection. He continued auditing classes when his schedule allowed, branching out from philosophy to literature and eventually to basic economics. Professor Mitchell had become something of a mentor, recommending books and occasionally inviting Marcus to coffee to discuss ideas that had emerged during class discussions. These conversations were among the highlights of Marcus's week's opportunities to engage intellectually with someone who treated him as an equal rather than a curiosity. During one of these coffee meetings in late January, Professor Mitchell brought up a subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Marcus," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision, "I've been thinking about your situation." "About Harvard?" Marcus looked up from his own cup, curious but cautious. He had learned not to expect too much from well-meaning advice, no matter how kindly it was offered. "I think they made a mistake," Professor Mitchell continued. "Not just in rejecting you, but in failing to recognize what you represent. You're not just someone seeking education for personal advancement. You're someone who understands that learning is valuable in itself, that knowledge has the power to transform not just individuals but communities." "I appreciate that," Marcus said carefully, "but Harvard has made their decision. I'm not sure what recourse I have." Professor Mitchell leaned forward, his expression intense. "What if there were other ways to demonstrate your capabilities? What if we could create opportunities for you to show what you're capable of beyond the traditional metrics that admissions committees use?" The conversation that followed planted seeds of possibility that Marcus hadn't considered. Professor Mitchell spoke about adult education programs, community college courses that could be transferred to four-year institutions, and alternative pathways to higher education that didn't require traditional prerequisites. He also mentioned something that made Marcus's pulse quicken: opportunities for parents to participate in educational programs designed to help them better support their children's academic development. "There's a program at MIT," Professor Mitchell said, pulling out his phone to show Marcus a website. "It's designed for parents of gifted children. They offer courses in child development, educational psychology, and advanced academic support strategies. It's not Harvard, but it's Ivy League-level education focused on helping people like you navigate the challenges of raising exceptionally bright children." Marcus stared at the screen, reading course descriptions that seemed tailored to his exact circumstances. The program was competitive, but it valued practical experience with gifted children over traditional academic credentials. It was designed for parents who found themselves in over their heads, trying to support children whose intellectual needs exceeded their own educational backgrounds. "The application deadline is next month," Professor Mitchell added. "I'd be happy to write you a recommendation." For the first time since the Harvard rejection, Marcus felt a spark of genuine excitement about an educational opportunity. This wasn't about proving himself to skeptics or chasing prestige for its own sake. This was about becoming a better father. To Sarah, about developing the tools and knowledge he needed to nurture her extraordinary abilities. That evening, Marcus sat at their kitchen table with Sarah, both of them working on their respective homework. Sarah was solving algebraic equations that her teacher had given her as extra credit, while Marcus was reading application materials for the MIT program. The parallels weren't lost on either of them. "What's that, Dad?" Sarah asked, looking up from her math problems to study the papers spread across Marcus's side of the table. "It's an application for a program that would help me learn how to be a better parent to a very smart daughter," Marcus said, smiling at her curious expression. Sarah beamed with the kind of pride that made all of Marcus's struggles feel worthwhile. "Are you going to apply?" "I think I am," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. As winter gave way to spring, Marcus threw himself into the MIT application with the same determination that had carried him through the Harvard process, but with a clearer sense of purpose. This wasn't about proving himself to anyone else. This was about becoming the father Sarah deserved, the one who could match her intellectual curiosity with knowledge and support rather than just encouragement. The application required essays about parenting philosophy, examples of how he had supported Sarah's academic development, and evidence of his own commitment to learning. Marcus wrote about their nightly homework sessions, about the way Sarah's questions pushed him to research topics he had never considered. He described the pride he felt watching her mind work through complex problems, and the humility that came from recognizing how much he still needed to learn. But most importantly, he wrote about love, about the way that loving someone can transform your own capacity for growth, can push you beyond limitations you had accepted as permanent. He wrote about Elena, about the promise he had made to give their daughter every opportunity to thrive. And he wrote about his growing understanding that being a good parent meant being willing to grow alongside your child, to remain curious and humble and eager to learn, no matter how old you got. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday in April, thick and official and completely unexpected. Marcus had learned not to hope too much, had prepared himself for another polite rejection. Instead, he found himself staring at words that seemed too good to be true. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the MIT Parent Education Initiative for Gifted Children. He read the letter 3 times before the reality settled in. MIT wanted him, not as a charity case or a diversity statistic, but as someone whose experience and dedication made him valuable to their program. The letter detailed a full scholarship that would cover tuition, books, and even provide a small stipend for childcare during class sessions. Sarah was at school when the letter arrived, but Marcus couldn't wait to share the news. He called Mrs. Rodriguez, who whooped with joy so loudly that Marcus had to hold the phone away from his ear. He texted Professor Mitchell, who responded immediately with congratulations and an invitation to celebrate. But mostly, he sat in their small kitchen, holding the letter and feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that doors were opening instead of closing. When Sarah got home from school, Marcus was waiting with the letter in his hand and a smile that lit up the entire apartment. "Guess what, sweetheart?" he said, unable to contain his excitement. Sarah dropped her backpack and looked at him expectantly, already sensing that something significant had happened. "MIT accepted me into their parent education program," Marcus said, watching her face light up with understanding and pride. Sarah launched herself into his arms with the kind of enthusiasm that reminded Marcus why all of his struggles were worthwhile. In her embrace, he felt not just her love, but her faith in him, her belief that he was capable of anything he set his mind to accomplish. "Does this mean you're going to be even smarter?" Sarah asked, pulling back to look at him with serious, 8-year-old eyes. Marcus laughed, but it was tinged with emotion. "It means I'm going to learn how to help you be as smart as you can be. It means we're going to grow together." That night, as Sarah worked on her advanced reading assignment, and Marcus researched the MIT program curriculum, both of them felt the electric anticipation of new beginnings. The rejection from Harvard had felt like a door slamming shut. The acceptance from MIT felt like a window opening onto possibilities they had never imagined. But even as Marcus celebrated this victory, he couldn't shake the feeling that their story was just beginning. Sarah's abilities continued to amaze everyone who encountered them, and Marcus was starting to understand that her intelligence wasn't just advanced for her age, it was exceptional by any standard. The MIT program would give him tools to nurture her gifts, but it would also connect him with other parents and educators who might help him understand just how remarkable his daughter truly was. As spring turned to summer and the MIT program approached, Marcus found himself cautiously optimistic about the future in a way he hadn't been since Elena died. He was still a single father working multiple jobs to make ends meet. He was still a man whose own educational dreams had been dismissed by institutions that couldn't see past their traditional expectations. But he was also a student again, about to embark on a learning journey that would transform not just his own capabilities, but his ability to support the extraordinary mind of the daughter who had become the center of his universe. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he suspected that Sarah's story, their story, was about to take turns that neither of them could yet imagine. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus felt like stepping into a different universe. Marcus Chen stood at the entrance to Building 32, clutching his acceptance letter and feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and imposter syndrome that had become his constant companion. The architecture was brutally modern, all glass and steel and sharp angles that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong in the world of advanced academia. Students walked past him with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their right to be in such places, their conversations peppered with technical jargon and references to research projects that sounded like science fiction. The Parent Education Initiative for Gifted Children was housed in a smaller building tucked away from the main campus thoroughfares. Marcus had arrived 30 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly from habit. Working multiple jobs had taught him that being early was a luxury he could always afford, even when other luxuries were beyond his reach. He used the extra time to walk around the building, familiarizing himself with the layout and trying to calm his racing pulse. Other parents were beginning to arrive, and Marcus found himself studying them with the same careful attention he had developed during his months at Whitmore Academy. These were clearly people who belonged in academic environments, parents whose own educational backgrounds had prepared them for the challenge of raising exceptionally gifted children. The women wore the kind of understated, expensive clothing that signaled professional success without ostentation. The men carried themselves with the easy confidence of people accustomed to being the smartest person in most rooms they entered. Marcus looked down at his own appearance, chosen carefully from the limited options in his wardrobe. His khakis were clean and pressed, his button-down shirt free of wrinkles, his shoes polished to a respectable shine. But he felt the invisible markers of class difference as acutely as if he were wearing a sign identifying himself as the janitor who somehow stumbled into this gathering of educated professionals. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the program director, a woman in her early 50s, whose credentials read like a roadmap through the most prestigious institutions in American psychology and education. Harvard undergraduate degree, Stanford PhD, postdoctoral work at Princeton, current professor at MIT with joint appointments in cognitive science and education policy. When she welcomed a group of 20 parents to their first session, Marcus felt both intimidated and oddly comforted by her presence. Dr. Vasquez had the kind of intellectual authority that made you want to prove yourself worthy of her attention, but also the warmth of someone who genuinely cared about the challenges facing the families in her program. Welcome to what I hope will be a transformative experience for all of you, Dr. Vasquez began, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in academic settings. You're here because you've recognized that raising a gifted child requires skills and knowledge that most of us weren't taught in our own education. You're here because you love your children enough to admit that you need help understanding how to support their extraordinary minds. She gestured to the circle of chairs where parents sat with notebooks and tablets, ready to absorb whatever wisdom would help them navigate the complex challenges of nurturing exceptional intelligence. Over the next 6 months, we're going to explore the psychology of giftedness, the social and emotional challenges that highly intelligent children face, and practical strategies for creating educational environments that challenge rather than constrain their development. The first exercise was deceptively simple. Dr. Vasquez asked each parent to introduce themselves and describe their child's particular gifts and challenges. Marcus listened as parent after parent described children who were reading at college level by age 6, solving calculus problems before they could properly tie their shoes, composing symphonies or writing computer programs or conducting scientific experiments that would impress graduate students. When his turn came, Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied moments when he had to speak about Sarah to people who might judge them both. "I'm Marcus Chen," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "My daughter, Sarah, is 8 years old. She's always been curious about everything, reading beyond her grade level, asking questions that I'm not always equipped to answer. She taught herself basic algebra by watching online videos, and she's been reading novels meant for teenagers since she was 6. He paused, aware that his description sounded modest compared to the remarkable achievements other parents had. Shared, "I guess what challenges me most is feeling like I'm not smart enough to keep up with her. I want to be able to guide her learning, but sometimes I feel like I'm just trying to stay one step ahead." Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully, her expression suggesting that Marcus's concerns were neither unusual nor unworthy of serious consideration. "That's actually one of the most common challenges we see," she said. "The gap between a child's intellectual development and a parent's ability to support it can create anxiety for everyone involved. But what you're describing isn't a deficiency on your part, Marcus. It's evidence that Sarah is truly exceptional, and that you're wise enough to recognize when you need additional resources." The validation felt like permission to breathe. Marcus had spent so many months feeling inadequate, wondering if his own educational limitations were somehow holding Sarah back. Dr. Vasquez's matter-of-fact acknowledgement that his situation was both common and manageable lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. The first few sessions focused on understanding the psychological and social aspects of giftedness. Dr. Vasquez explained how highly intelligent children often struggled with perfectionism, social isolation, and what psychologists called asynchronous development, where their intellectual abilities far exceeded their emotional and social maturity. Marcus found himself taking notes furiously, recognizing patterns in Sarah's behavior that he had noticed but never fully understood. Sarah's tendency to become frustrated when other children couldn't follow her reasoning. Her habit of befriending adults more easily than peers her own age. The way she sometimes seemed burdened by her own intelligence, as if she understood too much about the world's complexity for her 8-year-old emotional capacity to process comfortably. All of these behaviors, Dr. Vasquez explained, were common among highly gifted children and required thoughtful parental guidance to navigate successfully. But it was during the third session, when Dr. Vasquez asked parents to bring examples of their children's work, that Marcus began to understand just how exceptional Sarah truly was. He had brought a portfolio of her recent projects, the short story she had written about quantum mechanics told from the perspective of a photon, the mathematical proof she had developed to explain why infinity couldn't be treated like a regular number, and the detailed analysis she had written comparing the themes in 3 different Shakespeare plays. Marcus had always been proud of Sarah's work, but seeing it displayed alongside the achievements of other gifted children gave him new perspective on her capabilities. While other 8-year-olds in the program were demonstrating advanced abilities in single subject areas, Sarah's work showed sophistication across multiple domains that Dr. Vasquez examined with increasing fascination. "Marcus," Dr. Vasquez said, holding up Sarah's quantum mechanics story, "has Sarah had any formal instruction in physics?" "No," Marcus replied, suddenly self-conscious about the attention focused on Sarah's work. "She just reads voraciously about everything: science, literature, history, mathematics. I try to get her books from the library on whatever subjects interest her, but mostly she learns on her own." Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with Dr. Robert Kim, the program specialist in mathematical giftedness, who had been studying Sarah's proof about infinity with obvious interest. "This is extraordinarily sophisticated reasoning for a child her age," Dr. Kim said. "The conceptual understanding required to develop this proof suggests mathematical intuition that's typically seen in much older students. And this literary analysis, added Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the program's expert in linguistic giftedness, examining Sarah's Shakespeare essay, shows not just reading comprehension, but critical thinking skills that many high school students struggle to develop. She's making connections across texts, identifying thematic parallels, and articulating complex ideas with remarkable clarity. Marcus felt pride swelling in his chest, but also a growing sense of overwhelm. If Sarah was as exceptional as these, experts suggested, what did that mean for her future? What kind of educational opportunities would she need? What resources would be required to nurture abilities that were apparently far beyond what even other gifted children demonstrated? Dr. Vasquez seemed to read his thoughts. Marcus, I'd like to suggest that Sarah undergo comprehensive testing to better understand the full scope of her abilities. What you've shown us today suggests she may be what we call profoundly gifted, which occurs in less than 1% of the population. Understanding her specific cognitive profile would help us develop more targeted recommendations for her. Education. The testing session took place on a Saturday morning at MIT's Child Development Laboratory, a research facility that looked more like a comfortable family center than the intimidating academic environment Marcus had expected. Sarah approached the experience with the same curiosity she brought to everything else, asking the psychologist administering the tests about the purpose of each assessment and the theories behind different measures of intelligence. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the psychologist conducting the evaluation, was accustomed to working with gifted children, but even she seemed impressed by Sarah's engagement with the testing process. Sarah didn't just answer questions. She analyzed them, questioned assumptions, and occasionally suggested alternative approaches to problems that revealed thinking patterns beyond her years. The results, delivered 2 weeks later in Dr. Vasquez's office, confirmed what the experts had suspected. Sarah's IQ measured above 180, placing her in the profoundly gifted range that fewer than 1 in 10,000 children achieved. But more significant than the overall score were the specific cognitive abilities the tests revealed. Sarah demonstrates what we call exceptional intellectual giftedness, Dr. Martinez explained, spreading the test results across Dr. Vasquez's conference table. Her verbal reasoning skills are at the level of a typical college graduate. Her mathematical reasoning is comparable to students who have completed several years of advanced mathematics. And her abstract thinking abilities are so advanced that our tests couldn't establish an upper limit. Marcus stared at the numbers and graphs, trying to process what he was hearing. He had always known Sarah was smart, but the clinical documentation of her abilities felt both validating and terrifying. What does this mean for her education? He asked, the practical father in him, immediately concerned about how to translate test scores into real-world opportunities. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. It means Sarah needs educational experiences that match her intellectual capacity, not her chronological age. Traditional grade-level instruction will likely bore and frustrate her. She needs acceleration in some subjects, enrichment in others. And most importantly, she needs to be around intellectual peers who can challenge her thinking. The conversation that followed opened Marcus's eyes to educational possibilities he had never considered. Specialized schools for highly gifted children, university programs that allowed exceptional students to take advanced courses, online communities where profoundly gifted children could connect with intellectual peers regardless of geographic location. Research opportunities that would allow Sarah to work alongside graduate students and professors on projects that matched her abilities. But every opportunity came with obstacles that brought Marcus back to the harsh realities of their circumstances. The specialized schools were expensive and often located in cities they couldn't afford to live in. The university programs required advocacy and connections that Marcus didn't possess. Even the online communities required technology and resources that stretched his budget. "I want to give her everything she needs," Marcus said, his voice thick with frustration and determination. "But I'm not sure how someone in my situation provides those kinds of opportunities." Dr. Vasquez nodded sympathetically, her years of working with families having taught her that giftedness didn't discriminate by social class, but educational opportunities often did. "Marcus, Sarah's abilities are so exceptional that there are people and institutions who would be very interested in supporting her development. Not out of charity, but because nurturing minds like hers benefits everyone." She pulled out a folder that Marcus hadn't noticed before. "I've taken the liberty of researching some possibilities that might work for your family. There's a foundation that provides scholarships for profoundly gifted children from low-income families. There are mentorship programs that connect exceptional young students with researchers in their areas of interest. And there are summer programs specifically designed for children like Sarah." As Dr. Vasquez outlined each possibility, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Alina's death. Hope that felt sustainable rather than desperate. These weren't vague dreams or impossible aspirations. These were concrete opportunities with application processes and selection, criteria and timelines that made them feel achievable. But the most significant revelation came at the end of their meeting, when Dr. Vasquez mentioned something that made Marcus's heart skip several beats. "Marcus, there's one more thing you should know. Dr. Thompson at Harvard's Graduate School of Education has been following our program, and she's particularly interested in Sarah's case. She's requested a meeting to discuss possible opportunities." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Harvard, the institution that had rejected his own application with such dismissive efficiency, was now expressing interest in his 8-year-old daughter. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny, if it weren't also deeply painful. Dr. Vasquez must have noticed his reaction. "I know this might bring up complicated feelings, given your own experience with Harvard's admissions process. But this is different, Marcus. This is about Sarah, and it's about recognizing extraordinary ability regardless of conventional credentials." That evening, Marcus sat with Sarah at their kitchen table, both of them working on homework that looked very different than it had 6 months earlier. Sarah's assignments now came from multiple sources: advanced mathematics problems that Dr. Kim had recommended, literature analysis projects suggested by Dr. Walsh, and scientific inquiry investigations that challenged her to apply the research methods she was learning through her voracious reading. Marcus was working on his own assignments for the MIT program, reading research papers about the social and emotional needs of gifted children, and writing reflection papers that integrated the academic material with his experiences as Sarah's father. The parallel between his learning and hers wasn't lost on either of them. "Dad," Sarah said, looking up from a calculus problem she was solving for fun rather than for any formal assignment, "Mrs. Rodriguez told me that some people from Harvard want to meet with us. Is that true?" Marcus set down his pen, not surprised that Sarah had heard about the potential meeting through the informal network of neighbors and family friends who followed their story with invested interest. "It's possible, sweetheart. Dr. Vasquez mentioned that someone from Harvard's education school is interested in learning more about your abilities." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the same analytical approach she brought to academic problems. "Are you nervous about talking to people from Harvard?" The question was asked with the directness that children possess, but Marcus could hear the deeper concern underneath. Sarah was old enough to understand that Harvard had rejected her father's application, and smart enough to recognize the complicated emotions that their renewed interest might create. "A little nervous," Marcus admitted, choosing honesty over false reassurance. "But this isn't about me, Sarah. This is about you and your future. If Harvard has resources that could help you learn and grow, then I want to explore those possibilities." "But it's not fair that they didn't want you," Sarah said, her voice carrying the indignation that came from her developing sense of justice. "You're smart too. You help me understand things. You ask good questions." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion at his daughter's fierce loyalty. "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart. But sometimes fairness isn't the most important. Consideration. Sometimes we have to focus on moving forward rather than looking backward." The meeting with Dr. Thompson was scheduled for the following week, in a conference room at MIT that Dr. Vasquez had reserved specifically for the occasion. Marcus had no idea what to expect, but he spent the intervening days researching Dr. Linda Thompson's background and trying to prepare for questions that might arise about Sarah's abilities and educational needs. Dr. Thompson arrived with two colleagues, Dr. David Chen, a specialist in mathematical giftedness who shared Marcus's surname but no family connection, and Dr. Sarah Williams, whose expertise in early childhood development had made her a nationally recognized authority on nurturing exceptional young minds. The three Harvard professors carried themselves with the casual authority that Marcus had learned to recognize in academic environments, but their interest in Sarah seemed genuine rather than performatory. Sarah handled the meeting with the same poise she brought to every new situation, answering questions about her interests and learning experiences with thoughtful precision that clearly impressed the Harvard team. When Dr. Chen asked her to explain her approach to the infinity proof she had developed, Sarah walked to the whiteboard and delivered a 10-minute explanation that would have been sophisticated, coming from a graduate student. When Dr. Williams inquired about her creative writing process, Sarah discussed the way she developed characters by imagining how different personality types would respond to scientific or philosophical concepts. And when Dr. Thompson asked about her future goals, Sarah said something that made all the adults in the room pause and exchange meaningful glances. "I want to understand how things work," Sarah said with the earnest intensity that characterized her approach to everything. "Not just how they work now, but how they could work better. I want to ask questions that no one has thought to ask yet, and find answers that might help people." After Sarah left the room to explore MIT's campus with a graduate student volunteer, the conversation shifted to practical matters of educational planning and resource allocation. Dr. Thompson explained that Harvard's Graduate School of Education operated several programs designed to support exceptionally gifted children, including research initiatives that could provide Sarah with mentorship opportunities and academic challenges appropriate to her abilities. "What we're seeing in Sarah," Dr. Thompson said, reviewing the comprehensive test results that Dr. Vasquez had shared, "is not just high intelligence, but the kind of creative and analytical thinking that suggests genuine innovative potential. These are the minds that make breakthrough discoveries, that solve problems others can't even see." Marcus listened with growing amazement as the Harvard professors outlined possibilities that seemed almost too good to be true. Research mentorships with graduate students working on projects that aligned with Sarah's interests. Access to university resources including libraries, laboratories, and specialized equipment. Summer programs that would connect her with other profoundly gifted children from around the world. But the most significant opportunity came at the end of the meeting, when Dr. Thompson mentioned something that made Marcus's pulse quicken with excitement and anxiety. "Marcus, we'd also like to discuss the possibility of Sarah participating in a longitudinal study we're conducting on the development of profound giftedness. It would involve regular assessments and educational interventions designed to optimize her intellectual growth." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "The study comes with a full scholarship that would cover any educational expenses Sarah might incur, including private tutoring, specialized programs, and even college tuition when she's ready." For that level of study, Marcus felt the room spinning slightly as he processed what he was hearing. Harvard was not just expressing interest in Sarah. They were offering to invest in her development in ways that would have been impossible for Marcus to provide on his own. The full scholarship alone would transform Sarah's educational possibilities from distant dreams to immediate realities. But even as excitement built in his chest, Marcus felt the familiar wariness that came from experiences with institutions that promised more than they delivered. What would be expected of Sarah in return? He asked, his protective instincts making him cautious about offers that seemed too generous. Dr. Thompson smiled, as if she had been expecting the question and respected Marcus for asking it. Participation in the study would require regular testing and evaluation sessions, probably once every 6 months. Sarah would need to maintain detailed portfolios of her academic work, and we'd ask her to participate in research projects appropriate to her age and abilities. But there would be no expectation that she commit to any particular educational path or career direction. The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical details about scheduling, transportation, and integration with Sarah's current educational program. By the time the Harvard professors packed up their materials and prepared to leave, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic about possibilities that had seemed impossible just months earlier. That evening, as Marcus and Sarah walked through their neighborhood after a celebratory dinner at their favorite local restaurant, Marcus found himself reflecting on the dramatic changes their lives had undergone since his rejection from Harvard. The institution that had dismissed his own educational aspirations was now courting his daughter with offers of support that exceeded his most ambitious hopes. "Dad," Sarah said as they paused at the playground where she had spent countless hours as a younger child, "do you think Mom would be proud of us?" The question caught Marcus off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it touched the emotional core of everything he had been working toward. Elena's presence had been a constant motivation throughout his educational journey, her memory driving his determination to give Sarah every possible opportunity. "I think she would be amazed by how smart and kind and curious you've become," Marcus said, settling onto the bench where he had pushed Sarah on swings during simpler times when her greatest intellectual challenge was learning to count to 20. "And I think she would be proud that we found ways to support each other through everything." Sarah nodded seriously, then surprised him with a question that revealed the depth of her understanding about their circumstances. "Do you think Harvard wants to help me because they feel bad about not accepting you?" Marcus considered the question carefully, recognizing that his answer would shape Sarah's understanding of both institutional behavior and her own worth. "I think Harvard recognizes exceptional ability when they see it clearly," he said finally. "And sometimes it takes time for institutions to understand what they're looking at. But that doesn't make it fair that they didn't see your abilities," Sarah persisted, her sense of justice refusing to let the matter rest. "No," Marcus agreed. "It doesn't make it fair. But fairness isn't always the most important consideration. Sometimes we have to focus on what's possible now rather than what should have happened before." As they walked home through streets that had become familiar during their years of struggling to make ends meet, Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling over their lives like a blessing he was still learning to accept. Harvard's interest in Sarah represented opportunities that would have been unthinkable when he was mopping floors and dreaming of educational advancement that seemed forever beyond his reach. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity as Marcus and Sarah navigated the process of enrolling in Harvard's gifted education research program. Forms needed to be completed, schedules coordinated, and transportation arrangements made for the regular trips between their modest apartment and the prestigious university campus that had once seemed as distant as another planet. Sarah approached each new experience with the enthusiasm she brought to all learning opportunities. But Marcus found himself struggling with emotions that were more complex than simple gratitude. Walking through Harvard's campus as Sarah's father felt different than walking through it as a rejected applicant. He was welcome now, but only as the parent of someone whose abilities Harvard valued. His own intellectual worth remained unrecognized, his own educational dreams still dismissed. Dr. Vasquez, who had become both mentor and friend during Marcus's Time in the MIT program helped him process these complicated feelings during one of their regular check-in meetings. "It's natural to feel conflicted," she said, her tone carrying the wisdom of someone who had helped many parents navigate similar situations. "You're experiencing what psychologists call vicarious achievement, where a parent's own unfulfilled ambitions become invested in their child's success." "But that's not what this is about," Marcus protested, though even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were completely true. "I genuinely want what's best for Sarah. This isn't about me." "Of course it's about Sarah," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "But it's also about you, and that's perfectly normal. You've sacrificed and struggled to create opportunities for her that you never had yourself. It's natural to feel some resentment about institutions that welcome her while dismissing you." The conversation helped Marcus understand that his mixed emotions didn't diminish his love for Sarah or his genuine excitement about her opportunities. He could simultaneously celebrate her achievements and grieve his own unrealized potential. The two feelings weren't contradictory. They were both valid responses to circumstances that were inherently unfair. Meanwhile, Sarah was thriving in the Harvard program in ways that exceeded even the optimistic predictions of her evaluators. Her first research project, working with a graduate student studying the mathematics of music theory, produced insights that impressed the professors supervising the work. Her ability to see patterns across different domains of knowledge, to make connections that others missed, was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the program was designed to nurture. But it was during Sarah's third month in the program that something happened that would change the trajectory of their entire story. Dr. Thompson called Marcus at work, her voice carrying an excitement that was unusual for the normally composed academic. "Marcus," she said, barely containing her enthusiasm, "we need to schedule an emergency meeting. Something extraordinary has happened, and we need to discuss Sarah's future immediately." The urgency in her tone made Marcus's stomach tighten with anxiety. Emergency meetings, in his experience, rarely brought good news. "Is Sarah all right? Has something gone wrong with the program?" "Sarah is more than all right," Dr. Thompson replied, her voice now tinged with something that sounded almost like awe. "Marcus, what Sarah accomplished yesterday is going to change everything. Not just for her, but for our understanding of what young minds are capable of achieving." As Marcus hung up the phone and prepared to leave work for another unscheduled trip to Harvard, he had no idea that his daughter had just made a discovery that would capture the attention of researchers around the world, and finally force institutions like Harvard to confront their own assumptions about intelligence, worth, and the extraordinary potential that exists in the most unexpected places. The emergency meeting was scheduled in Harvard's most prestigious conference room, a space normally reserved for visiting Nobel laureates and high-stakes academic negotiations. Marcus Chen arrived to find not just Dr. Thompson and her usual colleagues, but a gathering of Harvard's most distinguished faculty members, including department heads he recognized from university websites and academic journals. The gravity of whatever had prompted this meeting was written in the serious expressions and hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered the room. Dr. Thompson rose from her seat at the head of the mahogany conference table, her usual academic composure replaced by barely contained excitement. Behind her, a massive screen displayed complex mathematical equations and diagrams that meant nothing to Marcus, but had clearly captivated everyone else in the room. The atmosphere felt charged with the kind of intellectual electricity that occurs when brilliant minds encounter something they've never seen before. "Marcus, thank you for coming so quickly," Dr. Thompson began, gesturing for him to take a seat near the head of the table. "I want you to know that what we're about to discuss is unprecedented in our experience with gifted children. Sarah has accomplished something that we're still struggling to fully comprehend." Dr. Michael Reeves, Harvard's Dean of Mathematical Sciences, leaned forward with the intensity of someone who had spent his entire career studying exceptional mathematical minds. "Mr. Chen, yesterday Sarah was working on what we thought was a simple pattern recognition exercise with one of our graduate students. Instead, she identified a mathematical relationship that has eluded professional researchers for decades. The explanation that followed required frequent pauses for clarification, as the assembled professors attempted to translate advanced mathematical concepts into language that Marcus could understand. Sarah had been working with graduate student Jessica Wong on a project involving prime number distributions, a seemingly abstract mathematical problem with profound implications for computer security and encryption technology. What Sarah had done, Dr. Reeves explained with obvious amazement, was recognize a pattern in prime number sequences that suggested a new approach to what mathematicians called the Riemann hypothesis, one of the most famous unsolved problems in mathematics. Her insight hadn't solved the hypothesis completely, but it had opened a new avenue of investigation that researchers around the world had been seeking for over a century. To put this in perspective, Dr. Chen added, his own excitement evident. Despite his professional demeanor, the Clay Mathematics Institute offers a $1 million prize for the solution to the Riemann hypothesis. It's considered one of the most important unsolved problems in mathematics, and Sarah has made a contribution that advances our understanding in ways we didn't think were possible. Marcus stared at the equations on the screen, trying to process what he was hearing. His 8-year-old daughter, who still needed help reaching items on high shelves and sometimes forgot to brush her teeth before bed, had made a mathematical discovery that impressed some of the world's leading experts in the field. Dr. Linda Morrison from the Department of Cognitive Science spoke next, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone accustomed to studying exceptional minds. What makes Sarah's discovery even more remarkable is the intuitive way she arrived at it. She didn't use advanced mathematical techniques or formal proofs. She simply looked at the numbers and saw a pattern that trained mathematicians had missed. The meeting continued for over 2 hours as various professors explained the implications of Sarah's discovery and discussed the unprecedented situation of having such a young contributor to advanced mathematical research. Phone calls were made to colleagues at other universities, research papers were referenced, and plans were developed for further investigation of Sarah's insight. But it was Dr. Thompson's final announcement that left Marcus feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Marcus, we've been in contact with the Clay Mathematics Institute, and they want to include Sarah as a co-researcher on the team investigating her approach to the Riemann hypothesis. She would be the youngest person ever to participate in such high-level mathematical research." The offer came with resources that Marcus could never have imagined. Full funding for Sarah's education at whatever level she was ready to pursue. Access to the world's leading mathematicians as mentors and collaborators. Opportunities to present her work at international conferences and contribute to research publications that would establish her as a serious mathematical talent while she was still in elementary school. But perhaps most significantly, the Clay Institute wanted to create a new category of fellowship specifically for exceptionally young mathematical prodigies, with Sarah as the inaugural recipient. The fellowship would provide not just financial support, but also the institutional recognition that could open doors to opportunities that hadn't previously existed for children her age. Marcus left the meeting feeling dizzy with possibilities and responsibilities that seemed almost too enormous to comprehend. Sarah was waiting for him in Dr. Thompson's office, working on a geometry problem that she had invented for herself while the adults discussed her future. She looked up when he entered, her expression curious, but not particularly concerned about the extended meeting that had been held in her honor. "Dad, did they tell you about the numbers?" Sarah asked, setting down her pencil and giving him her full attention. "I found something interesting in the pattern that Jessica was showing me. It's like the prime numbers are trying to tell us something, but we haven't been listening to them correctly." The simplicity of her explanation, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone she used to discuss her homework or describe interesting books she had read, made the magnitude of her achievement feel even more surreal. Sarah had no idea that her casual observation about prime numbers had stunned some of the world's most accomplished mathematicians. To her, it was just another interesting pattern in the endless stream of intellectual puzzles that captured her attention. That evening, Marcus sat across from Sarah at their kitchen table, both of them working on assignments that had taken on new significance in light of the day's revelations. Sarah was sketching geometric shapes and exploring the mathematical relationships she had discovered, while Marcus was reading research papers about child prodigies and trying to understand the psychological and social implications of Sarah's extraordinary abilities. The phone rang constantly throughout the evening as word of Sarah's discovery spread through academic networks. Reporters from science journals wanted interviews. Mathematics professors from universities around the world requested opportunities to discuss Sarah's work. Television producers inquired about documentary possibilities. Even government researchers expressed interest in understanding how such young minds might contribute to national scientific priorities. Marcus found himself in the unprecedented position of fielding calls from people whose names he recognized from textbooks and scholarly articles, all of them wanting to discuss his 8-year-old daughter's mathematical insights. The attention was flattering and terrifying in equal measure, representing opportunities beyond his wildest dreams, while also raising concerns about protecting Sarah's childhood and normal development. Dr. Vasquez, who had become Marcus's trusted advisor throughout their journey, helped him navigate the overwhelming response to Sarah's discovery during an emergency consultation the following day. "Marcus, what Sarah has accomplished is extraordinary, but she's still a child who needs stability, playtime, and age-appropriate social experiences," she reminded him as they discussed the flood of opportunities and requests that were pouring in. "I know that intellectually," Marcus replied, his voice tight with the stress of trying to make decisions about possibilities he had never imagined needing to consider. "But how do I balance protecting her childhood with providing her the intellectual stimulation she needs? How do I know which opportunities are genuinely beneficial and which ones are just people trying to exploit her abilities?" The conversation that followed helped Marcus develop criteria for evaluating the offers and requests that continued to arrive daily. Opportunities that would allow Sarah to work with genuine researchers on projects that interested her were worth considering. Media attention that focused on her mathematical insights rather than her age or personal story could be educational. Financial support that came without strings attached or expectations of future commitments would be welcomed. But anything that treated Sarah as a curiosity rather than a serious intellectual contributor would be declined. Requests that seemed designed to exploit her youth for publicity purposes would be rejected. And any opportunity that required Sarah to sacrifice normal childhood experiences or social development would be carefully scrutinized before consideration. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to approach her newfound fame with the same analytical curiosity she brought to mathematical problems. She was interested in understanding why adults were so excited about something that seemed obvious to her, and she asked thoughtful questions about the research process and the significance of mathematical discoveries. "Dad," she said during one of their evening homework sessions, "Dr. Reeves told me that some people have been working on the Riemann hypothesis for their entire careers without making the kind of progress I made in one afternoon. Why do you think that is?" Marcus considered the question carefully, recognizing that his answer would shape Sarah's understanding of her own abilities and their significance. "Sometimes," he said finally, "when you know a lot about something, it can be harder to see it with fresh eyes. You might have advantages because you don't know what's supposed to be impossible." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, then surprised him with a follow-up question that revealed her growing awareness of the attention her discovery had generated. Do you think people are interested in my math because it's good math, or because they think it's strange for someone my age to do it? The question cut to the heart of Marcus's own concerns about the media attention and academic interest that Sarah's work had attracted. He wanted to believe that the recognition was based purely on the merit of her mathematical insights, but he couldn't ignore the fact that much of the excitement seemed focused on her age rather than her contributions. I think it's probably both, Marcus said honestly. Your mathematical insights are genuinely impressive and valuable, regardless of how old you are. But people are also amazed that someone your age could make such discoveries, and that amazement sometimes gets mixed up with appreciation for the work itself. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call that would prove to be more significant than any of the academic or media requests they had been fielding. The caller was Dr. Robert Harrison, Director of Advanced Studies at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study, one of the world's most prestigious research institutions, and the former academic home of Albert Einstein and other legendary thinkers. Dr. Harrison explained that Princeton had been following the reports of Sarah's mathematical discovery with great interest, and that the Institute wanted to offer her something unprecedented, the opportunity to spend a summer working alongside some of the world's leading mathematicians as a full research partner rather than a student or observer. Mr. Chen, Dr. Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making offers to the world's most accomplished researchers. What Sarah has discovered represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that advances mathematical knowledge. We believe that providing her with access to our resources and collaborative opportunities could accelerate both her development and our understanding of the problem she's exploring. The Princeton offer was different from the other opportunities that had been presented to Sarah. Rather than focusing on her age or treating her as an exceptional student, the Institute was proposing to treat her as a legitimate research collaborator, whose contributions would be valued on their own merit. The summer program would provide her with access to advanced computational resources, collaboration with leading researchers, and the opportunity to present her work at international conferences. But perhaps most importantly, Princeton was offering something that addressed Marcus's deepest concerns about Sarah's development. The program included psychological support specifically designed for young researchers, ensuring that Sarah's intellectual growth would be balanced with appropriate attention to her social and emotional needs. Marcus spent several sleepless nights weighing the Princeton offer against his responsibilities as Sarah's father and his concerns about protecting her childhood. The opportunity was extraordinary, representing the kind of recognition and support that could shape the entire trajectory of Sarah's intellectual development. But it also meant acknowledging that Sarah had moved beyond the normal boundaries of childhood, education, and into territory that would require unprecedented decisions about her future. The decision was ultimately made during a family conversation at their kitchen table, the same place where Marcus and Sarah had worked on homework together for years and where they had celebrated his acceptance into the MIT program that had started their journey into the world of gifted education. Sarah, Marcus said, setting down the Princeton proposal and giving her his full attention, Dr. Harrison has offered you the opportunity to spend a summer at Princeton, working with some of the world's best mathematicians. It would mean leaving Boston for several weeks and working on very advanced problems with people who have been studying mathematics their entire careers. Sarah listened attentively as Marcus explained the details of the Princeton offer, her expression serious as she processed the implications of such an opportunity. When he finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, her 8-year-old mind working through considerations that would have challenged adults. Would I still be able to play and read books and do normal kid things? She asked finally, her question revealing that despite her extraordinary intellectual abilities, she was still very much a child with age-appropriate needs and interests. The program includes time for recreation and normal activities, Marcus assured her. Dr. Harrison specifically mentioned that they understand you're still a child and that work needs to be balanced with play and rest. Sarah nodded, then asked another question that surprised Marcus with its sophistication. Would going to Princeton help me become better at mathematics, or would it just make me famous for being a kid who does math? The question demonstrated Sarah's growing awareness of the attention her abilities had attracted and her desire to be recognized for the quality of her work rather than simply her age. Marcus felt proud of her maturity and her ability to distinguish between genuine intellectual opportunities and mere publicity. I think Princeton is interested in your mathematical abilities, not your age, Marcus said carefully. Dr. Harrison talked about your contributions to research, not about how unusual it is for someone your age to make those contributions. Their conversation continued for over an hour as Sarah asked thoughtful questions about the Princeton program and its potential impact on her education and development. Finally, she made her decision with the same analytical approach she brought to mathematical problems. I think I want to try it, she said, her voice carrying quiet confidence. But I want to make sure we can come home if it doesn't work out. And I want to keep working on my other interests too, not just mathematics. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and anxiety as he realized that Sarah was ready for opportunities that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. The journey from his rejection from Harvard to Sarah's acceptance at Princeton represented a transformation in their circumstances that still felt almost too remarkable to believe. The announcement of Sarah's Princeton appointment generated even more media attention than her initial mathematical discovery. News outlets around the world covered the story of the 8-year-old, who would be working alongside some of humanity's most accomplished researchers. Education experts debated the implications of such early intellectual development. Child psychologists discussed the potential benefits and risks of accelerated academic advancement. But amid all the external attention and analysis, Marcus found himself focused on the same concerns that had driven his educational journey from the beginning, ensuring that Sarah had every opportunity to develop her extraordinary abilities while still experiencing the love, stability, and protection that every child deserved. The months leading up to Sarah's Princeton appointment were filled with preparation that went far beyond the academic readiness that her mathematical abilities had already demonstrated. Dr. Vasquez worked with Marcus to develop strategies for helping Sarah navigate the social and emotional challenges of working in adult academic environments. Child psychologists provided guidance on maintaining age-appropriate activities and relationships while pursuing advanced intellectual work. Most importantly, Marcus spent countless hours talking with Sarah about her expectations, concerns, and goals for the Princeton experience. These conversations revealed a young person who was remarkably self-aware about her abilities and their implications, but who also maintained the curiosity and playfulness that defined her approach to learning. "Dad," Sarah said during one of their evening walks through their neighborhood, "do you ever wonder if Mom would be surprised by everything that's happened?" The question touched the emotional core of their journey, reminding Marcus that all of his efforts to support Sarah's development were ultimately motivated by the promise he had made to Elena to give their daughter every possible opportunity to thrive. "I think she would be amazed by how smart and thoughtful and kind you've become," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I think she would be proud of both of us for supporting each other through everything." Sarah nodded seriously, then surprised him with an observation that revealed her growing understanding of their family's journey. "I think she would also be proud of you for not giving up when Harvard said no. Because if you hadn't kept trying to learn and grow, maybe I wouldn't have had these opportunities either." The comment highlighted something that Marcus was only beginning to understand. His own educational journey and Sarah's intellectual development were not separate stories, but interconnected parts of a larger narrative about the power of persistence, the importance of nurturing exceptional abilities regardless of their source, and the way that love and determination could overcome institutional barriers and social expectations. As Sarah's departure for Princeton approached, Marcus found himself reflecting on the remarkable transformation their lives had undergone. Less than 2 years earlier, he had been a janitor whose educational aspirations were dismissed by the very institution that was now courting his daughter. The rejection that had once felt like a verdict on his worth had become the catalyst for a journey that had revealed possibilities neither of them had imagined. The final weeks before Sarah's Princeton appointment brought a steady stream of interview requests, documentary proposals, and invitations to speak at conferences about gifted education and mathematical research. Marcus carefully screened each opportunity, accepting only those that seemed genuinely focused on Sarah's intellectual contributions rather than the novelty of her age. One invitation that Marcus did accept came from Dr. Thompson at Harvard, who wanted Sarah to present her mathematical insights to a gathering of researchers and graduate students. The presentation would take place in the same building where Marcus had once cleaned floors, in a lecture hall he had mopped countless times while dreaming of opportunities that seemed forever beyond his reach. The evening of Sarah's Harvard presentation, Marcus sat in the audience surrounded by professors, graduate students, and researchers who had come to hear his daughter explain mathematical concepts that she had discovered through pure intuitive reasoning. As Sarah took the stage with the same calm confidence she brought to every intellectual challenge, Marcus felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that he had kept the promise he made to Elena to give their daughter every opportunity to fulfill her extraordinary potential. Sarah's presentation was met with applause that reflected genuine admiration for her mathematical insights, rather than mere amazement at her age. During the question and answer session that followed, she engaged with leading researchers as an intellectual equal, her responses demonstrating not just understanding of advanced concepts, but original thinking that impressed everyone in attendance. After the presentation, as Marcus and Sarah walked across Harvard's campus toward their car, Sarah made an observation that captured the significance of their journey better than any media coverage or academic recognition could. "Dad," she said, looking up at the buildings where some of the world's most important research was conducted, "I'm glad we didn't give up when things seemed impossible. Because it turns out that impossible things sometimes become possible if you keep working toward them." Marcus smiled, recognizing in her words the same determination that had carried him through rejection and doubt to a place where his daughter was being recognized as one of the most promising young mathematical minds in the world. The journey was far from over, but they had proven something important to themselves and to everyone who had doubted their potential. Intelligence and determination could overcome almost any obstacle, and dreams that seemed impossible could become reality for those brave enough to pursue them persistently. As they drove home through the streets of Boston, passing the neighborhoods where they had struggled to make ends meet and the buildings where Marcus had worked night shifts to support Sarah's education, both father and daughter understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Sarah's appointment at Princeton represented not just recognition of her extraordinary abilities, but validation of their family's belief that intellectual curiosity and hard work could create opportunities that transcended social and economic limitations. The media attention continued to build as Sarah's Princeton appointment approached, but Marcus found that the external recognition mattered less than the knowledge that he had successfully advocated for his daughter's needs and created pathways for her intellectual development that would serve her throughout her life. The rejection from Harvard that had once seemed like a crushing defeat had become the beginning of a story that exceeded his most ambitious hopes for their future. Sarah's mathematical discovery had shocked the academic world, not just because of her age, but because of the innovative thinking that her fresh perspective had brought to centuries-old problems. The recognition she was receiving from institutions like Princeton represented acknowledgement that exceptional minds could emerge from any background and that nurturing such abilities required looking beyond traditional credentials and conventional Expectations. As Marcus reflected on their journey from his Harvard rejection to Sarah's Princeton appointment, he understood that the most important transformation had not been in their external circumstances, but in their understanding of what was possible when intellectual curiosity was supported by unwavering determination and unconditional love. The story that had begun with laughter and dismissal was ending with recognition and respect, proving that sometimes the most unlikely candidates for success are exactly the ones who achieve the most remarkable accomplishments. The confrontation Marcus had been dreading finally arrived on a humid Tuesday morning in June, delivered in the form of an unexpected visit to his apartment from Dr. Patricia Williams, the headmaster of Whitmore Academy. She stood in his doorway looking uncomfortable and out of place in her tailored suit, her usual air of institutional authority somewhat diminished in the humble surroundings of the apartment where Marcus had raised his mathematical prodigy daughter. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering a message she had rehearsed. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but there are some matters regarding your employment that we need to discuss." Marcus invited her in, though he suspected he knew the purpose of her visit. Since Sarah's mathematical discovery had become international news, whispers had circulated through Whitmore Academy's corridors about the janitor whose daughter was working with Harvard professors and Princeton researchers. The same faculty members who had once walked past Marcus without acknowledgement were now stopping to ask about Sarah's work, their sudden interest feeling more opportunistic than genuine. Dr. Williams declined his offer of coffee and remained standing near the door, as if maintaining physical distance would somehow make the conversation easier. "Marcus, I want to begin by saying how incredibly proud we all are of Sarah's achievements. Her mathematical discoveries reflect the kind of exceptional talent that Whitmore Academy has always sought to nurture in our student body." The carefully chosen words made Marcus's stomach tighten with apprehension. He recognized the diplomatic language that institutions used when they were about to make requests or demands that they knew would be unwelcome. However, Dr. Williams continued, confirming Marcus's fears. "The media attention surrounding Sarah's work has created some complications for the school. Parents have been asking questions about why such an exceptional student isn't enrolled in our academic programs, and board members are concerned about the message it sends when our custodial staff's children are achieving recognition that exceeds what many of our enrolled students accomplish." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice level as he responded. "Are you suggesting that Sarah should have been enrolled at Whitmore Academy?" Dr. Williams shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the hypocrisy implicit in her position. "What I'm suggesting is that perhaps it would be beneficial for everyone if Sarah were to transfer to our school. We could offer her a full scholarship and access to our advanced academic programs. It would provide her with the educational environment she deserves while also resolving the uncomfortable questions that her current situation has raised." The offer was presented as generosity, but Marcus heard the underlying ultimatum. Whitmore Academy was feeling embarrassed that their janitor's daughter was achieving recognition that their own students couldn't match, and they wanted to claim credit for her success by bringing her under their institutional umbrella. "And if I decline this generous offer?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Dr. Williams's expression became more formal, her institutional mask slipping back into place. "Marcus, you've been an excellent employee, but the current situation has created complications that make it difficult for you to continue in your current role. The constant media attention, the disruption to normal school operations, the questions from parents about why their tuition-paying children aren't receiving the opportunities that your daughter has been given." She paused, seeming to search for words that would soften the blow she was about to deliver. "We would be prepared to offer you a generous severance package and excellent references for other positions. And of course, the scholarship offer for Sarah would remain open regardless of your employment status." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. After 2 years of reliable service, after countless nights spent cleaning the classrooms where Whitmore Academy's privileged students received their education, he was being fired because his daughter's success made the school uncomfortable. The institution that had once dismissed his educational aspirations was now trying to claim ownership of his daughter's achievements while simultaneously pushing him out. "Dr. Williams," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "are you terminating my employment because my daughter is too successful?" The bluntness of his question clearly flustered her. "Marcus, that's not how I would characterize the situation. We're simply recognizing that circumstances have changed, and we need to adapt to new realities. The new reality being that you can't tolerate having a janitor whose child is more accomplished than your students." Dr. Williams's composure finally cracked slightly. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the position this puts the school in. We have parents paying $50,000 a year in tuition who are now questioning why their children aren't achieving the kind of recognition that Sarah has received. It creates unrealistic expectations and uncomfortable comparisons." Marcus felt a moment of clarity that cut through his anger and hurt. Whitmore Academy wasn't firing him because of media attention or operational disruptions. They were firing him because Sarah's success highlighted the arbitrary nature of the advantages their wealthy students enjoyed. Her achievements demonstrated that exceptional ability could emerge from any background, undermining the narrative that expensive private education was necessary for intellectual excellence. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "You're not offering Sarah a scholarship because you want to help her. You're offering it because you want to claim credit for her success. And you're firing me because my presence reminds everyone that talent doesn't require a trust fund." Dr. Williams gathered herself, returning to the institutional authority that had served her throughout her career in elite education. "Mr. Chen, I think this conversation has become unproductive. You have until the end of the week to clear out your office and return your keys. The scholarship offer for Sarah will remain open for 30 days. After she left, Marcus sat in his small living room trying to process what had just occurred. In the span of 20 minutes, he had lost his job and been offered an opportunity. For Sarah, that would have seemed like an impossible dream just months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him that Whitmore Academy was now eager to claim the daughter they had never shown any interest in supporting when she was just another custodian's child. The news of his termination spread quickly through the informal networks that connected the families and staff at Whitmore Academy. By evening, Marcus's phone was ringing with calls from people expressing outrage at the school's decision. Mrs. Rodriguez was furious, threatening to call the local news stations. Professor Mitchell from his philosophy class was appalled, offering to write letters of support for any legal action Marcus might want to pursue. But the most significant call came from Dr. Thompson at Harvard, who had heard about the situation through the academic networks that were following Sarah's story with intense interest. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying genuine concern, "I'm calling because what happened at Whitmore Academy is completely unacceptable. No one should lose their job because their child is successful. I want you to know that Harvard's legal department is prepared to support you if you decide to pursue action against the school." The offer of legal support was gratifying, but Marcus found himself more interested in Dr. Thompson's next comment. "Marcus, there's something else I want to discuss with you. Harvard's Graduate School of Education has been reviewing your original application in light of everything we've learned about you through Sarah's involvement in our programs." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, unsure whether to hope or prepare for disappointment. "Your application was initially rejected because the admissions committee couldn't see past your unconventional background to recognize your genuine intellectual potential," Dr. Thompson continued. "But your involvement in Sarah's education, your participation in the MIT Parent Program, and your thoughtful advocacy for her needs have demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking and dedication that we should be seeking in our students. The pause that followed felt like it lasted forever. Marcus, if you're still interested in pursuing graduate education, Harvard would like to offer you admission to our master's program in education policy, with a full fellowship that would cover tuition and provide a living stipend. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. Harvard was offering him the opportunity that had seemed impossible when he first applied, recognition that his background and experiences had value that traditional admissions processes had failed to recognize. "Dr. Thompson," he managed to say, "are you offering me admission because you feel guilty about rejecting me before, or because you genuinely believe I can contribute to your program?" Her laugh was warm and genuine. "Marcus, I'm offering you admission because you've demonstrated exactly the kind of insight and dedication that makes for exceptional graduate work. Your understanding of educational equity, your advocacy for gifted children, and your ability to navigate complex institutional systems are precisely the qualities we need in education policy leaders." That evening, Marcus shared the day's dramatic developments with Sarah as they prepared dinner together in their small kitchen. She listened with the same analytical attention she brought to mathematical problems, processing both the injustice of his termination and the opportunity that Harvard had presented. "So Whitmore Academy fired you because they're embarrassed that I'm smarter than their students?" Sarah asked, her 8-year-old sense of justice clearly offended by the school's behavior. "They fired me because my success reflects poorly on their assumptions about intelligence and social class," Marcus corrected gently. "They can't admit that exceptional ability doesn't require expensive private education." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And now Harvard wants you to be a student there?" "They want me to study education policy, to learn how to advocate for students like you who need specialized support." "That makes sense," Sarah said with the pragmatic wisdom that consistently amazed Marcus. "You've gotten really good at figuring out how to help me learn. Maybe you can help other kids too." The decision to accept Harvard's offer wasn't difficult, but it required careful consideration of how graduate school would integrate with Sarah's own academic trajectory. Her summer at Princeton had been so successful that the institute had invited her to continue working with their research teams. During the academic year, she would need transportation to Princeton twice a week and supervision during Marcus's class hours. These logistical challenges led to another surprising development when Dr. Vasquez from the MIT Parent Program proposed a solution that would benefit everyone involved. MIT was launching a new initiative to study the families of highly gifted children, and they wanted Marcus and Sarah to serve as case study participants while Marcus pursued his Harvard degree. The MIT family study would provide Sarah with educational support and supervision during Marcus's class hours, while also creating opportunities for both of them to contribute to research that could help other families navigate similar circumstances. The program would pay Marcus a research stipend that would supplement his Harvard fellowship and cover their living expenses during his graduate studies. But the most gratifying aspect of these new opportunities was the way they transformed Marcus's relationship with the academic institutions that had once seemed so intimidating and unwelcoming. Instead of being the janitor who dreamed of belonging in intellectual spaces, he was becoming a graduate student whose experiences were valued by researchers and professors who recognized the insights he could bring to education policy discussions. The contrast with his treatment at Whitmore Academy couldn't have been more stark. While the elite preparatory school had fired him for making them uncomfortable about their own limitations, Harvard and MIT were embracing him as someone whose unconventional path had given him valuable perspectives on educational equity and talent development. Sarah's reaction to these developments revealed a maturity that continued to amaze Marcus. Rather than being resentful about his termination from Whitmore Academy, she was excited about the research opportunities that their new arrangement would provide. "Dad," she said as they discussed the logistics of coordinating his Harvard classes, With her Princeton research schedule, I think getting fired from Whitmore Academy was actually good luck in disguise. Now you get to study what you're really passionate about instead of just cleaning floors. Marcus smiled at her optimistic interpretation, but he also recognized the truth in her observation. Being forced out of his custodial position had eliminated the financial necessity that had kept him tied to work that didn't fully utilize his abilities. The combination of his Harvard fellowship and the MIT research stipend would actually provide more income than his multiple jobs had generated, while also advancing his educational goals. The weeks leading up to the start of Marcus's graduate program were filled with media attention that felt very different from the coverage that had focused on Sarah's mathematical discoveries. Journalists were now interested in the broader story of educational opportunity and social mobility, using Marcus and Sarah's experiences to explore questions about how institutions recognize and nurture exceptional talent. Marcus found himself being invited to speak at conferences about educational equity and gifted education policy. His presentations drew standing ovations from audiences who were inspired by his advocacy for Sarah and impressed by his insights into the barriers that prevented many talented children from accessing appropriate educational resources. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources within the communities where Marcus and Sarah had always lived. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a neighborhood celebration when Marcus received his Harvard acceptance letter. Tony Morales, from the auto shop who had once mocked Marcus's fancy dreams, stopped by their apartment to apologize and congratulate him on proving that working-class parents could successfully advocate for their children's educational needs. The support from their community highlighted something important about their journey that the media coverage often missed. Marcus's success wasn't just a personal achievement. It was validation for everyone who had been told that their dreams were unrealistic or that their background disqualified them from pursuing educational opportunities. Sarah's summer at Princeton had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Her collaboration with leading mathematicians had produced 3 research papers that were being prepared for publication in prestigious academic journals. More importantly, she had thrived in the intellectual environment, forming friendships with graduate students and postdoctoral researchers who appreciated her insights without condescending to her. Because of her age, Dr. Harrison at Princeton had been so impressed with Sarah's contributions that he proposed creating a permanent position for her as a junior research associate, a title that had never been offered to someone her age but reflected her genuine value as a mathematical collaborator, rather than simply a promising student. The Princeton appointment would allow Sarah to continue her research throughout her elementary and middle school years, providing her with intellectual challenges appropriate to her abilities while also ensuring that she maintained connections with age-appropriate activities and social experiences. The position came with a research budget that would support her work and a stipend that would contribute to her college savings account. But perhaps most significantly, Princeton's recognition of Sarah as a legitimate research collaborator represented a new model for how institutions could support profoundly gifted children without exploiting them or treating them as curiosities. Her appointment was based on the quality of her mathematical contributions rather than the novelty of her age, setting a precedent for how other exceptional young minds might be integrated into serious academic research. The first day of Marcus's Harvard graduate program arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded him of Sarah's first day at Princeton. He walked across the campus where he had once imagined himself as a student, but this time he belonged there not as a dreamer with impossible aspirations, but as a legitimate member of the academic community whose experiences were valued by his professors and classmates. His fellow graduate students represented diverse backgrounds and professional experiences, but Marcus quickly discovered that his path to Harvard was actually less unusual than he had expected. Several of his classmates were career changers who had come to graduate school after working in other fields. Others were parents whose children's educational needs had motivated their interest in education policy. His custodial background was unique, but his motivation to create better opportunities for exceptional children resonated with many of his peers. The coursework was challenging but manageable, drawing on analytical and communication skills that Marcus had developed through his advocacy for Sarah and his participation in the MIT Parent Program. His professors appreciated the practical perspective he brought to theoretical discussions about educational equity and talent development. But the most rewarding aspect of his Harvard experience was the opportunity to connect his personal story with broader policy questions about how educational systems could better serve gifted children from underrepresented backgrounds. His final project for his first semester was a case study analysis of Sarah's educational journey, examining the institutional barriers they had encountered and the innovative solutions that had ultimately created appropriate opportunities for her development. The case study drew attention from education policy researchers who recognized its implications for understanding how exceptional talent emerged and developed across different socioeconomic contexts. Marcus was invited to present his analysis at the annual conference of the National Association for Gifted Children, where his presentation received enthusiastic response from educators and researchers who were working to create more equitable access to advanced educational opportunities. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to thrive in her research position at Princeton while also maintaining friendships with children her own age and pursuing interests beyond mathematics. She had joined a local youth orchestra where she played violin, participated in a community theater group, and maintained her voracious reading habits across subjects ranging from marine biology to ancient history. The balance between Sarah's exceptional intellectual abilities and her normal childhood development had been one of Marcus's greatest concerns throughout their journey. But her current situation demonstrated that it was possible to nurture extraordinary talent without sacrificing the play, friendships, and diverse experiences that all children needed for healthy development. Dr. Vasquez's research study at MIT was documenting exactly this kind of successful integration, using Marcus and Sarah's experiences to develop recommendations for other families navigating similar circumstances. Their participation in the study was contributing to a growing body of research about how profoundly gifted children could be supported in ways that honored both their exceptional abilities and their developmental needs. The media attention continued throughout Marcus's first year at Harvard, but it had evolved from sensationalized coverage of the janitor's genius daughter to more thoughtful analysis of educational equity and talent development. Marcus and Sarah were increasingly recognized as advocates for gifted education, rather than simply subjects of curiosity about exceptional achievement. Their story had become a touchstone for discussions about how educational institutions could better recognize and nurture talent, regardless of students' socioeconomic backgrounds. Education researchers cited their experiences in academic papers about gifted education policy. Advocacy organizations used their story to illustrate the need for more equitable access to advanced educational opportunities. But beyond the policy implications and research contributions, Marcus and Sarah's journey had demonstrated something fundamental about the power of persistence and advocacy. Marcus's refusal to accept limitations had created opportunities that neither of them could have imagined when he first applied to Harvard as a working-class single father with educational dreams that seemed impossible to achieve. The Harvard rejection that had once felt like a devastating verdict on his worth had become the catalyst for a journey that had transformed both of their lives. Sarah's mathematical discoveries had opened doors that led to Princeton research appointments and international recognition. Marcus's advocacy for her needs had evolved into graduate study that was preparing him to help other families navigate similar challenges. As Marcus completed his first year at Harvard and Sarah continued her groundbreaking mathematical research at Princeton, both of them understood that their story was far from over. Sarah's intellectual development would continue to present new challenges and opportunities. Marcus's education policy studies were preparing him for advocacy work that could benefit countless other gifted children who needed appropriate educational support. The transformation from custodian to graduate student and from unrecognized child to celebrated researcher had required courage, persistence, and the kind of mutual support that made their family stronger than either of them could have been alone. Their success had vindicated Marcus's belief that intelligence and determination could overcome institutional barriers and social expectations. But perhaps most importantly, their journey had proved that exceptional ability could emerge from any background and that nurturing such talent required looking beyond traditional credentials and conventional expectations. The institutions that had once dismissed them were now celebrating their achievements and seeking to learn from their experiences. The laughter that had once greeted Marcus's Harvard application had been replaced by recognition and respect that reflected not just their individual accomplishments, but the broader lesson that talent and determination could create possibilities that seemed impossible until they became reality. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Students sat in aisles, faculty members stood along walls and overflow. Crowds gathered in adjacent rooms watching live streams. Harvard's most prestigious lecture hall had never hosted anything quite like this. A joint presentation by a former custodian turned education policy graduate and his 9-year-old daughter, whose mathematical genius had redefined academic possibilities. Marcus stood at the podium where Nobel laureates had delivered groundbreaking research, his Harvard graduation cap still fresh from the ceremony 3 hours earlier. Beside him, Sarah adjusted the microphone with the same calm confidence she brought to every intellectual challenge. The banner behind them read, "Breaking Barriers, When Institutions Finally Listen." 18 months ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I was mopping these floors while dreaming of opportunities that seemed impossible. Today, I graduate with highest honors from the same institution that once rejected my application. The audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Sarah waited for quiet, then stepped forward with the poise of someone who had grown comfortable addressing rooms full of distinguished academics. Mathematics doesn't care about your address or your parents' education level, she said, her young voice carrying clearly through the hall. Numbers tell the truth regardless of who discovers their patterns. Dr. Thompson, now serving as Dean of Graduate Studies, watched from the front row with visible emotion. The transformation she had witnessed exceeded anything in her decades of academic experience. Marcus had not only excelled in his graduate studies, but had revolutionized Harvard's approach to identifying and nurturing unconventional talent. His master's thesis on institutional blindness and exceptional ability had become required reading in education policy programs nationwide. Sarah's continued mathematical breakthroughs at Princeton had established her as the youngest researcher ever to co-author papers in 3 major mathematical journals. But their greatest achievement was invisible in the packed auditorium. Marcus's advocacy had led to the creation of the Chen Initiative, a Harvard program providing full scholarships and comprehensive support for gifted children from working-class families. Sarah's research stipend from Princeton had funded her younger brother, David's advanced education after Marcus remarried and expanded their family. The real victory, Marcus concluded, looking out at faces that now showed respect instead of dismissal, isn't that we succeeded despite the odds. It's that we proved exceptional minds exist everywhere, waiting for institutions brave enough to recognize them. Sarah stepped forward for their final comment together. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they belong somewhere. We learned it's better to create spaces where everyone already does. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. News outlets called it historic. But for Marcus and Sarah, walking hand in hand across Harvard Yard toward their future, it was simply the beginning of everything they had always known was possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.